that are of interest to us, actually. In today's episode, we're going to be we're going to be tracing a story within our history. We're going to be tracing the footsteps of our past leaders and heroes who have made impact in our life. And sharing with us today is Isaac Inkum, a Ghanaian researcher, content developer, and a writer. So, Mr. Ikem, I want to thank you. I hope I pronounced the name very well to start with. So I want to.
No problem. So the name is Isaac
Oh,
Inkum.
it's the Ikum. Okay, because there is a name that
Yes,
look
Inkum.
sound a little bit like that in Nigeria. It will say Ikem.
Oh, okay.
It's okay.
I see.
So I want to thank
All
you
right, no
for
problem.
joining us in African Docs project.
All right.
I appreciate your time. And why don't we start by you presenting yourself, because at least the people want to know who they are listening to. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we move on.
Okay, thank you, Ogbehi. So my name is Isaac Inkum. Obviously, I'm a Ghanaian and an African. I'm someone who is very much interested in research work. I like to build content. Very interesting content to share with people. Content that we can learn from and market. So for about 8 years now, I've been working on a movie project on Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. I think that he's a personality that we have, especially as Africans, haven't taken much time to get to know his period, his contemporary, and his personality as an African leader. So I took it upon myself in concert with some colleagues of mine and one senior colleague called Mr. Boashi to work on an Nkrumah project. So for the past 8 years, this is what I have been doing or have dedicated my time in doing. Yes.
This is something really very interesting in that often we say that we need to continue to revisit the story of our hero, and also because the younger one that are growing up, they need to know this story. Of course, this story will not just jump into their head. They will only be able to know if artists like you, if people that are into content creation dedicate time to really evaluate this story. Because it is important, it is very, very important that we continue to feed our head with this information, because these are people that have laid the foundation upon our whole history, our contemporary history, as it were. And so, so tell me, how did you first begin to develop interest in history like this? Because I repeat again, these are very important part of our civilization.
Yeah, exactly. So, Cicero, the philosopher, once said that when it comes to history, there are things that happen before we were born. There are things that happen way before our time. So, before you can appreciate the things that happened before we were born, you would need to consult history. And so, not to know what took place before you were born, as he said, is forever to remain a child. So, that aspect of information and trying to find out what has happened before you came to exist in a particular place, you need to consult the document, that is the history. So I decided that, well, as an African, there are lots of things that we can find in our history books, but often we focus on little details. And if we want to be able to find out what really happened in terms of the decisions that former leaders and people who lived before our generation took, then we need to go and consult history. It's more like an intellectual or a knowledge oracle that people can scoop information from. That is why I decided that Nkrumah, especially when it comes to Africa's development or Africa's surge of independence, he's always in the picture. He's always a reference point. And often we haven't given enough time to look at him in particular and see what contributions, especially Nkrumah, made to Africa's development and Africa's independence. That is why I took it upon myself that as a young African, to appreciate what our former leaders did and to understand how far their choices and decisions have come to have influence in our generation, then we need to consult the history and find out exactly what they did and why they did the things they did to better our future and know that we can learn something from them so that in going forward, we can also do things in the right way and learn from their mistake.
Thank you very much for that, Isaac. Now, the question I'm going to ask you now before, then of course, we're going to move into the detail of the life of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Tell me a little bit about the project that you are working in. Let us understand it a bit. Give us a little bit background of this particular project you are working in.
Okay, so this project started when I was about exiting the university. I had done a 4-year program. In fact, I studied history. I mean, when I started my undergraduate program, I did history for 2 years. And when I was about exiting, I had a very good friend of mine, Kwesi Hayford, who is very interested in history. And he came up with the idea that, look, there's a lot of information when it comes to Africa and our leaders that often we haven't paid attention to, that we can bring it up to movie screens for people to watch and appreciate what our leaders did. When you look at other countries like America, there's a whole collage of historical movies on Lincoln. There are movies on Roosevelt. Even in Africa, there's a movie on Idi Amin. There's a movie on Nelson Mandela. But when you look at Kwame Nkrumah, the foremost personality who fronted the agenda of independence, there's no movie about him. So we decided that, well, then we can do something about that. And that means we need to do research. We need to research the information and find out exactly what he did and how we can be able to then, from the research, develop the content that can be a film script or a film screen. Screen script for people to come on board for a movie to be made out of it. And Egbehi, I tell you, it's been such an overwhelming experience to know that as I speak to you, there's no single movie on Kwame Nkrumah. There's no single biopic on the person who started the whole independence agenda. And we felt that that is not good for Africa. And if Nkrumah were an American, I'm sure Americans would have done so many movies about him. So we decided that, look, let's do something, especially as young people. For once, let us change the narrative and tell the world that Africa can produce very good content. Africa can make good content out of its great leaders, and Nkrumah is one. And that is why I decided to jump on the project. And that is what I've been doing for the past 8 years.
Thank you very much. I really want to appreciate you again for the good work that you are doing, because like you correctly said, if we look at also some other countries, it's one of the things that we also are complaining about, no? That sometimes we relax too much, expecting other people to come and do the work for us. But of course, these are changing.
Exactly.
These are changing because we can see evidence also in your whole case and some other people that are taking up the challenge. And I want to believe that Africans are waking up. By African, I mean young people are waking up to the challenge of understanding that this is their job. It is our job to tell our story. So I really do appreciate the good work that you are doing, because we are the one that will do this job. No other person is going to do it. In fact, if Hollywood were to come to write the story of Kwame Nkrumah, they're not going to write it the way the Ghanaian will write it, the way African will write it, the way you will write it. This is why it is that your story of this particular character in our existence is the most authentic compared to how a European will come to write the story. So there is nothing to regret about it at all. This is the right thing to do. And if it happens that this is the right time that you are doing it, then this is the right time to do it. So let's start from the person of Kwame Nkrumah right now, because you have done the research, so you can tell us something. Who was him as a person? Let's start from him growing up.
Okay, thank you very much. Kwame Nkrumah as a personality, of course, when you are talking about a human being, you can look at the personality of the human being in sundry ways. You can look at him as a professional, as a career person. You can look at the person as a social person and as a father or as a leader. And we can box Nkrumah in all these because, yes, he was an African leader, he was a political leader, but as well, he was a human being, he was a father, right? He was a social person. And it will interest people to know that when Nkrumah, of course, he was born in Nkrofo in Ghana, a very small village. I mean, it didn't come with any pomp and pageantry, and it looks deserted. You could say it is the Bethlehem of Jesus Christ. I mean, such a hometown, a place where it looks deserted, and there's nothing exciting about the place. That is where Nkrumah came from. And as a young boy growing up, he was not used to schooling. It was Nkrumah's mother, called Nyaniba, who decided to introduce Nkrumah to school. In fact, Nyaniba herself wasn't educated. She had never been to school before. She was just a common trader who was doing her business. But when she realized that the Roman Catholic Church had instituted schools, I mean basic schools in the village, she thought that it would be good to take the young Nkrumah to school. And in Nkrumah's own autobiography, Obehi, if you would allow me to refer to it
Please go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
and read interesting portions of that to you, how Nkrumah felt about being introduced to school for the first time. And this is what Nkrumah says. He says, I'm reading from page 10 of Nkrumah's autobiography, and he titles it Birth and Early Childhood. He says, I soon learned, however, that life for a growing boy was not all play, at least not for boys with parents like mine. Although my mother had never had the benefit of formal education herself, she was determined that I should be sent to school at the earliest opportunity. My father, probably due to my mother's persuasive power, was strongly in favor of this also. Even though I could often get around my father, I knew that once my mother's mind had been made up, there was nothing I could do about it. I found my first day at school so disappointing that I ran away, determined never to return. But my mother turned a deaf ear to my raging protest and quietly but determinedly dragged me by the arm each morning and deposited me in the schoolroom. So this is a very interesting thing to read. That when people see the Nkrumah that we have come to know him, people never think that, look, when the guy was a young boy, he never liked school. And it had to take the effort and the determination of the mother to introduce Nkrumah to school. And I think that it's a great theme of the contribution of a mother, especially somebody who had never been to school herself, introducing the young child to school. I think that a lot of times we have that experience in Africa where, I mean, young African mothers, oftentimes they have to singly raise up young kids, and the absence of the man in the house, and the woman is left alone, and she has to fend for the child and all that. So Nkrumah's mother taking that decision, for me, speaks a lot for our women, our young mothers, or our African mothers. The contributions that they make in our lives is very great, and we can see it here obviously that Nkrumah's mother was of a great influence over Nkrumah's life. And it took her determination to put Nkrumah in school. And from then he began to enjoy school. So this is a little bit about his childhood days, if you ask me.
Thank you very much for the. It's very interesting, because one of the things that we also try to pay attention to in this child, actually in most of our project, is that we try to really look at the human being in the story, because when you look at a movie or a book or look at the over romanticized side of any history of an icon in our collective history. Of course, we don't know the little bit of pieces that make up the human being, because that is what people easily connect to. But when you were talking of the autobiography, the part where he was saying he didn't want to go to school, so his mother had to drag him to school. People will say, but really, did he do that? Of course he does, because that is that is what children does. I remember when
exactly.
when I was much smaller, in fact, in one of my books, I wrote, that the children had to be, they will go to school, they will run home, they will never go back and go. They are dragged by the hand to go back to the second day, and they will cry again. They will, until they get to a time they get used to it. We all do this. Of course, we all. I don't know for other people, but I did it. I remember I cried to school.
Yeah, we do. Very interestingly, I mean, that reminds me. When I was young, and I never wanted to go to school, what I would do is that I would hide one of my shoes and then hide one of my socks, forgetting that you don't have one pair of shoes, you have others. So if the other ones are. So yeah, we all try to do some of these things. And it tells you that Nkrumah, of course, the man was a normal human being. He wasn't a saint. I mean, and he tries to make us appreciate his beginning, his humble beginning in his autobiography. That look, the Nkrumah that we know of as a great African personality, look at his beginning. He was somebody who never liked to go to school, and he had to take the effort of the mother to make sure that Nkrumah would go to school. So it's a story we can relate to. Every young African can relate to the story. Yeah.
And that is really very fascinating about it, especially when we look at the effort of our mother. People who never even went to school, they try to invest in us so that we can become better than them. We can become champion of our society. So the effort of the women, of the parents, not only the women, of the parents should never be should never be underrated, because they make up who we are today. All right, now let's look at Kwame Nkrumah growing up and then traveling overseas, because that is where the thing becomes to get more interesting, because he then mingled. Of course, we pay attention to the diaspora here. I'm here in Italy and I'm connected with you in Ghana. So one of the things that we are paying attention to is the African in diaspora, because that is where it begins to get more interesting now, because Kwame Nkrumah is now in the US. So tell us about his traveling overseas. Was there anything that really led to him going to overseas to study? Was there a kind of a mission behind it? So tell us what you know about him traveling overseas to study, because then that is where he will meet the message of Marcus Garvey, and then he will come home with a lot of messages that will transform the messages of Pan-Africanism that will make him the hero of Pan-Africanism actually. So go from there.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is that, I mean, no man lives, I mean, in isolation. I mean, people become who they are as a result of their interaction with the environment, with the people they find themselves with their contemporary. Now, Nkrumah was born sometime in 1909, right? And as a young boy who has been taken to school by the mother and having loved school, he enjoyed studying, and successfully he graduated from school, from basic school. So upon that, he then began to start some job as a people teacher. And apart from Nkrumah's mother, Ogbehi, another person who I think we need to give credit to having contributed to Nkrumah's development and to having fueled his desire in education is a Roman Catholic father called Father Fisher. And the reason why I'm taking my time to explain some of these things is because sometimes These are the nitty gritty details of the personality of a leader that we often skip and people don't often pay attention to, but they are very important. Now, let me read from the autobiography again, all right? And let us all appreciate what Reverend Frazier did for Nkrumah. Now, at page 11, this is what Nkrumah talks or says about the Roman Catholic father. He says, about this time, I came under the influence of a Roman Catholic priest, a German called George Fisher. This large and well disciplined man seemed to take a liking to me, and he did much to help me in my studies. In fact, he became almost my guardian during my early school days, and so relieved my parents of most of the responsibility with regard to my primary education. My father was not at all religious, but my mother was converted to the Catholic faith, and it was through her and Father Fisher that I was also baptized into the Roman Catholic Church. In those days, I took my religion seriously and was very often to be found serving at Mass. Now, unquote, this is Nkrumah speaking about the contribution of Father Fisher. Now, from that on, he goes to school, he likes school. Nkrumah becomes a people teacher, a young people teacher. And it takes another reverend man of God, right, to discover Nkrumah and his talent and introduce him to another phase of education. Here I'm talking about Reverend Fraser. Now, I'm making mention of these people because these are the people who can, or people who help to build up a leader. A leader cannot build up himself. You don't become a leader right on the spot. Some people have to contribute to making you a leader or not. Now, Reverend Frazier was a principal of a government school, which was known as Prince of Wales, or in Ghana, now it is known as Achimota School. It's one of the best second cycle schools you can find in Ghana, perhaps in Africa. And Reverend Frazier had to travel way back to the village where Nkrumah was teaching as a people teacher. At that time, Nkrumah was just 17 years old. And Reverend Frazier, having seen Nkrumah, a young boy, teaching, he said, wow, this guy is smart. And I need him in the government school to be trained as a young teacher. So Reverend Frazier now tells Nkrumah that he has to go to Accra, comes to the city to be schooled as a young teacher. Nkrumah comes to Accra, he enrolls at Achimota. He is appreciative of another level of education, and he's getting to develop himself as a young boy or as a young African who has been introduced to education by these people. Now, fast forward, Nkrumah completes Achimota School, right? Now, the excitement about traveling to the diaspora, where did it come from? That's the first question. Who are the people who influenced Nkrumah to want to travel to the diaspora to study? Now, another personality I will make mention of is called James Iman Kwegyir Aggrey. Kwegyir Aggrey was one of Africa's foremost educationists. In fact, he was the vice principal of the Prince of Wales College. And listen to what Nkrumah says about him in his Nkrumah's autobiography, page 14. This is what Nkrumah says. But the figure to whom all Africans looked that day was Dr. Kwegyir Aggrey, assistant vice principal and the first African member of the staff. To me, he seemed the most remarkable man that I had ever met and had had the deepest affection for him. He possessed intense vitality and enthusiasm and a most infectious love that seemed to be bubbling up from his heart. And he was a very great orator. It was through him that my nationalism was first aroused. He was extremely proud of his color, but was strongly opposed to racial segregation in any form. So this is another personality that influenced Nkrumah. Now, the other personality who also influenced Nkrumah's decision to travel abroad was our own Nnamdi Azikiwe of Nigeria. Now, Nnamdi Azikiwe himself has schooled in America. Azikiwe was one of the first African to be enrolled in Lincoln University. And Azikiwe, having traveled back to Gold Coast, to Africa, he visited Gold Coast to give a speech in a teacher's seminar. And listen to what Nkrumah says about Azikiwe. He says, my nationalism was also revived about the same time through articles written by the African Morning Post by Nnamdi Azikiwe, a Nigerian from Onitsha. Azikiwe was himself a graduate from an American university, and when I had first met him after he had addressed a meeting of the Gold Coast Teachers Association some years earlier in Accra, I had been greatly impressed by him and had been more determined than ever to go to America. So these are the people who influenced Nkrumah to travel to America for higher education, because he felt that if he needed to be better and contribute to Africa's growth and achieve his young dream, then he had to go outside Gold Coast. Aside the fact that there was a Prince of Wales College that trained teachers, there wasn't any university in Gold Coast as at that time. And here I am talking about 1935. And so Nkrumah decided to travel to America for his higher education. But how did he go? You know, Agbehi, Nkrumah had to travel. First of all, he had to stow away to Nigeria. He stowed away to Nigeria to meet a relative who had to help him organize some funds and add up that money to the monies that he had from the family, the extended family. And it was that money that Nkrumah used to travel to America for higher education. So if you ask me, I think that these are the people who, upon Nkrumah having interacted with them, realized that if he needed to be any better and contribute greatly to Africa's development, then he had to travel outside Gold Coast to pursue higher education. And that was the motivation for his travel.
That is great. You see, the thing is that there are a lot of pieces that really make up the human being, the human story, you know, and it's beginning to get even more interesting as we talk more and more about it. And you see, this is why we need you, the historian, people who have the time to be able to see them and begin to look at the page and turn it again and again and try to make sense out of it. We all need each other. We all need each other to be able to do all this. And also, there is a saying among the Igbo people, of course, I'm not going to say it in Igbo language, that you cannot sit down in one place to look at the masquerade. You need to be dancing, because if the masquerade is dancing, you need to be dancing around with it. That is how you are going to be able to see it. Because if you sit in one place now, you only see it far away from you. So the life of this Ghanaian son, who has become, of course, an African son, an African hero, you see, he'd be moving from one place to another, from Ghana to Nigeria, now to the United States, where he studies. Because if he didn't go to the United States, he would never meet the message of Marcus Garvey. Because at that time, Marcus Garvey have sowed his seed in the mind of the people, talking of more than 400 million African, okay, he said, Negro at the time. They need to unify themselves and come home. Because, of course, they didn't get there because they wanted to go to the diaspora. These are people that were chained and took... Anyway, this is the sad part of our story. I'm looking at it like a kind of a laughing matter, but that is not what actually I mean. I mean it actually in the opposite sense. So this is where Nkrumah, who is a young boy who is coming from Ghana, also himself, knowing what has happened to his ancestors, took this message very seriously. I want to repeat that again. He took the message of Garvey very, very seriously. And he came home with it. So I want you to spend some time there explaining to us the contact between the young Nkrumah the message of Marcus Garvey, and he bringing back the message home. Because then I'm going to ask you some questions as the elaboration went on.
All right. Thank you very much, Ugbehi. So the first point is that how did Nkrumah get to hear about Marcus Garvey? Is it that somebody introduced Marcus Garvey and his writings to Nkrumah? And who did that? That's the first question. And let us look at that in his autobiography. You will find out who introduced Marcus Garvey to Nkrumah. Did Nkrumah, by his own volition, discover Marcus Garvey and his writings? No. Somebody introduced Marcus Garvey to Nkrumah. And Nkrumah tells us who did that. So I will take our viewers and listeners back to Nkrumah's own autobiography, page 14. And it is there. And I read, he says, he's talking about Dr. Kwame Agri, because Kwame Agri, as I mentioned, was the vice principal of the Prince of Wales College, now Achimota College. Kwame Agri was also teaching history in Achimota. Nkrumah was a student of Kwame Agri. And this is what Nkrumah says about Kwame Agri. He says, it was through him that my nationalism first aroused. Agri was extremely proud of his color, but was strongly opposed to racial segregation in any form. And although he could understand Marcus Garvey's principle of Africa for the Africans, he never hesitated to attack this principle. He believed conditions should be such that the black and the white races should work together. Cooperation between the black and the white peoples was the key note of his message and the essence of his mission. And he used to expound this by saying, quote, you can play a tune of salt on the white keys and you can play a tune of salt on the black keys, but for harmony, you must use both the black and the white, unquote. I could not even at that time accept this idea of Agri's as being practicable, for I maintain that such harmony can only exist when the black race is treated as equal to the white race, that only a free and independent people, a people with a government of their own, can claim equality, racial or otherwise, with another people, unquote. Now, this was Nkrumah talking about Kwame Agri. So it means that when Nkrumah was a student in Achimota College, he was having deliberations with the teacher, that is Kwame Agri. And Kwame Agri, being someone who was well read and a historian himself, introduced or made mention of Marcus Garvey to Nkrumah for the first time. So Nkrumah got to hear about Marcus Garvey through Kwame Agri. And that was it, that Nkrumah thought that, well, Agri's approach to Africa's independence and the harmony could only happen if we first of all look at what Marcus Garvey is saying. And Nkrumah then began to develop the interest in reading about Marcus Garvey, learning about Marcus Garvey. And so when you go back, same into his own autobiography, there's a place where Nkrumah stresses that when he was a young boy and a student in Lincoln University, he was reading some books. And all the books that he was reading, one of them that really impacted him most, and I read from page 45 of his autobiography, he says, but I think all of the literature that I studied, the book that did more than any other to fire my enthusiasm was Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, published in 1923. Garvey, with his philosophy of Africa for the Africans and his Back to Africa movement, did much to inspire the Negroes of America in the 1920s. It is somewhat ironical that the white Americans in the South supported Garvey in this movement of his. They did this not because they were interested in the emancipation of the Negro as such, but because they wanted to get rid of the black man from the South and felt that this would solve the Negro problem. It was unfortunate that I was never able to meet Garvey, as he had been deported from the country before I arrived in connection with some kind of alleged fraud that he had gotten involved in. He eventually went to England, where he died in 1940. So this is Nkrumah talking about Garvey. And he had wished that he would have had the opportunity to meet Marcus Garvey. So having not been able to meet him, he thought that reading his books, all right, made him knowledgeable about the philosophies and principles of Marcus Garvey. And Nkrumah felt that Garvey's message was the right approach for the African to search forward his independence, his freedom, his right as a human being. And Nkrumah stuck to it. And from his autobiography, he tells us that it is the reason why, amongst all the books that he read, he found Garvey's to be the most influential one, even though he didn't have the chance to meet him. Yes.
Yeah, great. Now, do we know, according to your research, is there something that we can hold on to that Kwame Nkrumah did while he was in the diaspora? I don't know. Of course, we know that they organized a lot of conferences and things like that because before he moved down, both the group that came to Nigeria, the group that went to other parts of Africa, because this is not something that happened in 1 year or in 2 years. This is a kind of a revolution that took place for a lot of time. They connected from the US to the UK, they organized conferences, talk about a lot of things, no? Because they were young people that had the blood of revolution burning and really bubbling in there. So is there something that you find that maybe we don't know that they did, a kind of a work or a symposium of relevance that you can touch while they were seeing the diaspora studying?
Yes, thank you, Ogbehi. And it's what you are saying is very right because we have to know that Rome, as the saying goes, was not built in 1 day. The efforts of these young Africans did not, I mean, it was not GMO'd. And when I mean GMO'd, I mean it didn't start at a go. It didn't happen at once. It was a gradual processes of engagement. And I'll read to you an account. And this account is from a man called Akweje. You know, when you come to Ghana, we talk about the big six. Now, the big six are seen as those who spearheaded Ghana's fight for independence. One of them is called Akweje. Now, Akweje was also an American student. He was Nkrumah's bosom friend. In fact, when the United Gold Coast Convention in Gold Coast, as at 1947, was looking for someone to become the general secretary of that movement, it was Akweje who suggested or recommended Nkrumah, who was by then still in America. So Akweje is at the heart of all this discussion. Now, he has an unpublished memoir. There's an unpublished memoir that he has, and I have a copy here. Let me read to you some of the discussions that these guys were having. And it was not just, I mean, Ghanaian students, these were also Nigerian students who were involved in this because Lincoln University was a black university to enroll young Africans, young black students, and educate them. So that is why you find most of these young Africans from the colony going to Lincoln University. And that place was a citadel of knowledge where they could engage themselves to see how best they can struggle and fight for Africa's independence. So let us look at what Akweje says in one of his engagements with Nkrumah. He says that at Lincoln University, all right, I registered for courses in political science, economics, sociology, English, Latin, and philosophy. It should be mentioned at this stage that about 1 week after I had arrived at Lincoln University and had met Mr. Francis Njia Kofi Nkrumah, about 9 students also arrived at Lincoln University from Nigeria. They came to Lincoln University on the inspiration of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. The names of these students were Mr. Imbonu Ojike, Mr. Kingsley Ozomba Imbadiwe, Mr. George Imbadiwe, Mr. Okechukwu Ikejani, Mr. Inodu Okunko, Mr. Inwafo Orizo, Mr. Chukwu Emeka. These were Igbo students, some of whom held scholarships awarded to them by Dr. Azikiwe. The others were Mbaka Ababiu and Mr. Idion, who came to Lincoln University on scholarships awarded them by the Igbo Union. Another student was Mr. Abdul Karimu Disu, a Yoruba from Western Nigeria, who was at Lincoln University on scholarship awarded to him by Nnamdi Azikiwe. And now listen to what he says. Quite often in the evenings, after we had all had our evening meals in the dining hall of Lincoln University and had returned to our respective rooms in the halls of residence, we used to meet in the room of Mr. Francis Kofi Nkrumah at Houston Hall and engage ourselves in a long, heated discussions about emancipation of our respective African countries from colonial domination and how we should all of our respective African countries from colonial domination and how we should all work together to attain national independence for our people when we finish our studies and return home. Now, and then he goes on to say that Mr. Francis Kwame Nkrumah used to tell us that he had been thinking and dreaming about the establishment of a United States of Africa. The idea or dream presupposes the end of colonial domination. So I'm just trying to give us an idea of what was happening as far back as 1937. We are talking about 1937 here, way before Ghana's independence, way before the formation of Organization of African Union, which is the African Union as we have it. So these deliberations were what young Africans in the diaspora were engaged in. They were having series of meetings in universities, and even after they had moved from the university, there was what was called the West African Students Union. The West African Students Union was a vibrant student group made up of Africans who often were seen to be engaged in discussing how to emancipate their various African colonies from colonialism. And Nkrumah, each and every one of them was key in that, to the point that it all climaxed in the Fifth Pan African Congress, which was held in Manchester, 1945, where now he had to meet people like Du Bois, people like George Padmore, who was from Trinidad and Tobago, and they were engaged oftentimes in having series of meetings, all to the good of leading Africa from colonialism. So yes, these engagements started way back, as far back as 1937.
Okay. As way back at 1937, and of course, it began to have effect. Because we begin to see the effect not only in Ghana but also in Nigeria. You were making mention of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe and the people that he led to the university there, to the diaspora, and all the effort that, of course, that they made in Nigeria in the independence. Because, like you are saying, which is of course the truth, it is not something that happened overnight. The independence of African state, even though we can actually say that a lot of African states are still not independent as it were, because by independence we want our people to be free, to be able to make our decision. We haven't got it yet. We haven't got it there yet, but at least we got a kind of semi-independent. That is what we can say we have today. But people fought to be able to get even that semi-independent. You see, so at that time, these young people, were sitting down and they were dreaming of the future of their country. But that dream haven't yet been realized. That is true. But what I'm trying to think now is, do you know either way kind of a collaboration between what they were thinking then? Because as students, they were just very few. They didn't really have any power, as it were, compared to the base, no, compared to the real Africa home, no, where they are coming from. Do you know if there is any kind of a collaboration with what was at home, so that they were sort of working together, so that by the time they leave there, they were able to, Kwame Nkrumah will eventually become the president of Ghana. Because as a student, you don't just finish school and become a president, no? A lot of things have to take place before that process can eventually materialize. Do you know either way kind of a collaboration or a connection, a networking that took place along that line?
Okay. So Ogbehi, aside the deliberations that was going on in the diaspora amongst these young African students, now back in Gold Coast, I can speak for Gold Coast. I know that there were other personalities who were also at the front of the struggle. And yes, there was collaboration. There was serious collaboration between students who were overseas and political personalities who were in Ghana. In Gold Coast, now Ghana, You could talk about or make mention of people like J.B. Dankwa, who himself was once upon a time a member of the West African Students Union in overseas. And interestingly, what was happening was that there was a kind of consistent engagement between students in young African students who were based in America and young African students who were also schooling in UK. All right. So let us look at a tripartite collaboration. And here, tripartite, I mean that students who were in America, students who were in UK, and then political personalities who were in Gold Coast. So the base was Gold Coast. But because as at then there was no university for higher education in Gold Coast, most of these guys had to travel to abroad for their higher education. Then after that, they come back to the base, right? So the educational laboratory, the enlightenment laboratory was not in Africa. It was in America and UK. It was in either Lincoln University or Oxford University. So having received that education, they came back home. But even whilst they were there was a series of collaborations between these young people. Now in Ghana, as I mentioned, there were people like J.B. Dankwa, who had become a barrister. There were people like Akweje, who I mentioned. He had come back to Ghana. But all these people were still engaged or connected or were staying in touch with the students who were overseas. And the effort was to achieve one thing, that was the independence of the African colonies. And Nkrumah himself, having traveled from Gold Coast to America and having left America for UK, in all, he has spent 12 years in the diaspora. Nkrumah has spent 12 years in the diaspora. So, yeah, that really he had lost touch with the base, but he was still getting information from Africa on what was happening on the continent. And it was as a result of that and the reason why Akweje, who had come back to Ghana, when there was a call or a need for somebody to become the General Secretary of the United Gold Coast Convention, he recommended Kwame Nkrumah. And that is how Nkrumah came back. In fact, Nkrumah was not going to be in the picture, Obehi, especially when it had got to do with the base, those who were in Africa, who were in Gold Coast, and what they were doing. Nkrumah was not part of that. It was when Akweje suggested Nkrumah, and the group then had to now begin to ask, who is this guy called Kwame Nkrumah? And then Akweje now begins to sell and market Nkrumah to the United Gold Coast Convention. That was when Nkrumah became the synosia or a spectacle to look at. And then they said, okay, if you think he's good because of what you say he's been doing in the diaspora for Africa and Africa's independence, then let us invite him. Then write a letter to him to bring him down. So yes, there was constant engagement, but for the effort of Akweje, Nkrumah would have never been in the picture for Africa's independence.
This is really interesting. Now, another thing that is equally interesting is the fact that although Nkrumah and the rest group, of course, needed independence of Africa, they all didn't really have the same idea of the independence, no? Of the kind of independence that they really wanted for their states, because we need to understand that it becomes a little bit more complex, no? When we're talking of the states. I understand that when we talk of Africa, we are all tempted to easily generalize, no? Of course, most of us we are guilty of this in most of the cases, no? Because we tend to look at Africa now like a small village, the way everybody know everybody, no? Like, but it's not always the case, because we all do not agree on the same thing. We all do know Africa is the most diverse part of any part of the human race, in terms of culture, in terms of belief, in terms of way of life, in terms of even the type of human being that exists in the space of time, is the most diverse and complex. to sometimes generalize. I don't know if it really is always the case. So what I'm trying to say here is that even though most of them have gone to the same university, though really all of them didn't go to the same university in US. So went to university in France and all that. And so when it came to really independent, being free from the European domination, they all do not agree on the same idea of the state or the kind of state that they want. A good example could be, for example, when Kwame Nkrumah, becoming the president, went to the president of Ivory Coast, the adjacent state, no, Humphrey Boffanin. So let's start to unite, no, because we are just two brothers. But Humphrey Boffanin did not agree. Humphrey want to remain with France so that Ghana can remain with the UK, no, which is to say that they didn't really agree on how to forge ahead as a united African state. I don't know if you want to say something along that line, both in the pre-independence and in the independent state, in terms of whether actually they agree or what kind of agreement was actually in place.
Yes, you are very right. I mean, even with the independence of America, the founding fathers, when you read about them, you get to know that the Jeffersons, the Washingtons, they had their own disagreements, and there had to be some compromise at a point for Americans' independence to be possible. So yes, in a human institution, there's a saying that if we all agree, then somebody is not thinking. So yes, there were disagreements. People felt that things could be approached in a different way. For example, as far back as 1938, thereabout, when these young students, especially the young Nigerian students and then young Goku students, were forming their groups and having deliberation, they had disagreements. And Nkrumah made mention of that in his autobiography, where um, he says that it was not easy going by any means, for we were continually coming up against internal conflict between the Nigerian and Gold Coast elements. The Nigerians claimed that there was no question of considering African or West African unity at the existing stage of colonial independency, and he insisted that we should leave these colonial territories to struggle for themselves. So even amongst themselves as students, they had their own disagreement. Now, the second example, when you make reference to the United Gold Coast Convention, which was a movement for independence for Ghana, amongst the members themselves, they had their own disagreement to the point that there's a slogan in Ghana where we say that Nkrumah's movement or party was saying independence now. The other group was saying that independence within the shortest time possible. The issue is with approach, but the price, the aim, the focus was still one. The focus was still independence, but it was about difference in approach, right? So that when you talk about the formation of the African Union, there were the Casablanca group, there was the Moroccan group, there were different blocks of the African Union. All right. And you make mention of Hofebuan. Yes, because you are talking about those who were colonized by France and then colonies who were colonized by Britain. Right. So definitely there will be issue of language barrier. Definitely there will be a misunderstanding of how things can be achieved. However, they were all looking for one thing, which was independence. Africa should be independent. Africa should unite. But then it was a problem of approach as to how to go about it. All right. And Nkrumah had his own approach. Nkrumah felt that, look, yes, that is why even at a point people say that Nkrumah decided to marry from Egypt because Nkrumah needed that North African connection to connect with the sub-Saharan Africa, to still forge ahead this issue of Africa can unite. Now, other people thought otherwise. The Hufebuanis, the Nyereres of Tanzania, the Jomo Kenyatta of the Kenyans, they also had their own approach, right? Yes, but the point is that they all knew that The answer was Africa uniting. And perhaps that is why now we have the establishment of the AFTA in Ghana, which is to spearhead African trade now. That is why still Organization of Africa Unity has metamorphosized into African Union. They are having their own challenges, but they all know that it is true that the answer to Africa's problem is Africa unity. But we are still hitherto struggling to give it a particular approach to achieve that unity. And many still feel now in contemporary Africa, a lot of people think that Nkrumah's approach would have worked if it had not been abandoned, if he had not been overthrown.
Yeah, yeah. I like the analogy you gave before that if everybody agree, it means that someone is not thinking. That is very important because it is not possible even for a family that we do not disagree. We always we can not all have the same mindset. Like I was saying before, Africa is a complex animal, so it is not possible that all of us must agree on the same thing. But at least we must agree on where we want to go. That you are correctly right.
Exactly.
We all know that we want to be free. It's just the approach that is different. But that is why we need leaders. That is why we need people who are able to see far ahead, who are able to negotiate, who are able to understand that sometimes we need to give and we need to take. It doesn't always have to go my own way. But if I can manage to also understand the way of the other people, then we can manage to go on at this or the same. Because the politics too, the people, all the politicians do not agree. But we all agree that this state, this country must survive. Our people must be served. So whether it is you, the president, or me, the president, the people must reign supreme. It doesn't mean that we agree, but we are still going to function anyway. So I really take that to heart. That is a very good analogy. I really like that part very well. Now, Kwame Nkrumah is the president of Ghana. What do you take away from him as a quality leader that we must take home? I'm looking at how do you assess his own leadership, known as one who is agitated to become a leader of a country or a leader of a continent. Now, he really has the mantle of leadership as the president of Ghana. What is his own leadership quality that we can take home?
All right, great, thank you. So, I mean, having appreciated from whence Nkrumah's experiences began, I mean, traveling abroad, being a young African student facing racism, facing hardship, I mean, experiencing difficulties as a young man who was trying to achieve his personal dream and finding out that, look, Africa's problem cannot be solved individually. It has to be a collection of Africans. And that's why Nkrumah fronted the idea of Africa unity. And that is why there's a speech he gives, and then there's there's a heavy punchline which says that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it is linked up with the total liberation of all other African states. It's just a simple theme of brotherhood that Ogbehi, my success has to be linked to your success for Africa's independence to be possible, right? That is all the idea Nkrumah was preaching. But as a leader, then it tells you that there has to be some kind of personality in the person that fuels that desire. The idea or the trait of unity, wanting to unite, wanting to see your fellow brother successful. If not, Nkrumah wouldn't have dished out a huge sum of money to Guinea when the French decided to pack all their things from Guinea because Guinea had decided not to join the French group, right? But because Nkrumah wanted to see his fellow other African country succeed, he dished out that huge sum of money for them. And it tells you that there's a personality of oneness, love that the person has for the fellow African. So it is important. And sometimes we may think that it is so trivial, but it's important. If you don't love your fellow brother, you don't love your country, then you will not want to see it do good. Nkrumah had that kind of love. His dream was that we all should do good. I should not be the only one doing good, or I should not be the only one successful. We all should be successful. And it is one thing that I take from him, that in whatever I do, even as a young man, in my small capacity, I shouldn't look out for my own success, my own joy, my own achievement, my own happiness, but I should also look out for the happiness of other people. Perhaps it is the lesson in the golden rule that we need to look out for each other, to be each brother's keeper. And that is one trait that Nkrumah really had. It is for that reason that he didn't amass any wealth for himself. Today, if you should ask, where is Nkrumah's property? Where is Nkrumah's house? Or even go to Google and try to check Nkrumah's net profit, you won't find anything like that. Because he felt that as a human being, I have to serve other people and I have to work for the interest of other people. And it's a very important trait of leadership. If you don't have a leader who cares, who is willing to sacrifice to achieve the lot for many people, but not for himself and his cronies, then it means that that leadership or that leader is not a good leader. And it is one thing that especially our contemporary Africans need to look at. They need to look at how to love the citizen, how to love the country, how to work for the interest of the lot, not just for themselves. And I bet you, if we have leaders who start to care, who start to really care, and not to isolate themselves from the people, because before they become leaders, they are not living in the Flagstaff houses and the Jubilee houses and the presidential palaces. They were living amongst the people. But immediately they are voted into power, they alienate and isolate themselves from the people. And therefore, they do not appreciate the difficulty and the hardship of the people because they are not living with them. But Nkrumah gets go, even when he had become a prime minister and a president, he was still living with the people. He was still,
It's okay.
he was still living with them. So that is the trait I think that our African leaders need to learn from Nkrumah. The love for the people, the care for the nation.
In fact, you jumped into the question I wanted to ask you, which was the one I was following that, in that you see, this series of leadership podcast, it is created so that we can learn from our leaders, because we really have good leaders. It's true that if you see some of other podcasts that we have done, we are very harsh on the current crop of leaders that we have, in that they do not represent the people enough. We say this a number of times, no? In that we want leaders that are representing the people. We want leaders that want to stand with the people. We want leaders who want to suffer with the people. We want leaders who want to represent the people. Not those that are living in tinted houses, like you correctly said, no? Who are far away from the people, because Africans need leaders. They don't need people who are abusing them, who are holding the resources of the land and telling them rubbish. You see, so basically we have a fine line that defines what we are talking about here. It's called a people-oriented leadership, a leadership that is based on the interest of the people. Of course, this should not be very complicated to understand. If you are leading the people, if your interest is really the interest of the people, this should be reflected in what you do. It's not difficult to be understood, no? Take, for example, currently, a lot of leaders all over the world are concerned about their citizens because there is economic downturn everywhere. There is hardship everywhere. So what do you do as a leader? You need to look for a way to put your people to work. But what do you see across Africa? Our land are still there, fertile. Nobody is in need. Our leaders are not doing. I'm not saying that we should hope that it should work. Leadership is not about hoping. You need to be deliberate. like really be deliberate on what you want. If we say, for example, in Ghana, there is not enough food to feed the population, we don't need to pray that food should come. We need to have a deliberate effort of saying, okay, we are putting 10,000 people to work. 10,000 people to work. What is the strategy? It must be clear. These are scientific things. These are things that are very practical. They are pragmatics. This is how to find leadership that is based on the interests of the people, because we want the people to have food to eat. If we say, for example, that in Nigeria there is no electricity, because this is what Nigerian people have been complaining for years and years and years. A leader who said that I'm here to represent the interests of the Nigerian people should come with a solution. Not be thinking that, okay, maybe. We don't need maybe. We don't need maybe. You must have the solution or clear the way for somebody who have the solution. Because leadership is about providing a solution to the people. You should represent the interests of the people. Not buy generator to power your house and leaving the population there or to live in the dark. You didn't say that when you were campaigning. You didn't say you were going to live in the mansion, in Aso Rock, in affluence, leaving the population alone. You say you were going to provide a solution to their problem. That is why they voted you. So live up to the expectation. This is what we mean by leadership that is based on the interests of the people. So where I'm actually dragging at right now is that when we decide to take up this argument or looking at our leaders, our past leader, today we are talking of Kwame Nkrumah, but of course we are going to talk of other leaders in Africa. We are trying to make a comparison between them, their ideology, what they represented, and the current crop of leaders we have today. So show me, is there anything that we can compare between the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah as president of Ghana and the current crop of leaders we have today? Even looking at maybe the current president of Ghana and also other leaders in Africa. Because it is time for us to learn. Because like we started it, Kwame Nkrumah was just like every other child. He was crying to go to school. He didn't want to go to school, which means he's not an iron man. He's a human being. He's just a human being. So help us on this.
Okay. So, Ogbe, thank you very much. Now, to add to that, you see, if we are to juxtapose the style of leadership between the contemporary African leaders we have in the 21st century African leader, and then compare a 20th century, the latter part of the 20th century African leader. So let us look at Kwame Nkrumah, for example, all right? And then compare Nkrumah to our current crop of African leaders. What's the difference? Now, the first difference for me is that there is no precision. And what I mean by precision is that a leader needs to have a direction. A leader needs to be intentional about something. And he needs to be the one to provide the solution or the way, because he must have thought about it, he must have believed in it, and he must have the know-how to make it happen. Now, how did Nkrumah start building these projects in Ghana? Now, let me read one of his letters. This one was written by him when he was in Guinea after the coup. You know, he had to reside or emigrate to Guinea after the coup. Now listen to what Nkrumah says. I have told you that before we can make real progress and raise our living standards to the highest level that is possible, we must put first things first. If you wish to construct a house, you must first lay the foundations. You cannot start building in the air. It is the same with a nation. If you wish to build an economically independent nation, you must lay the foundations in roads and water supplies and electricity and a modern harbor. You must educate your people and train them for the new skills that are necessary to operate, and an industrial program. This is what we have been doing in Ghana. This has been the work and happiness program of the Convention People's Party. This is how we have been laying the foundations upon which to build a country which can stand up in equality to any country in the world. So the point is that Nkrumah had a direction. He had precision. He was not working on try and error, right? So if we have leaders currently who lack precision, because today they try it, it doesn't work, they move to another thing, it doesn't work, and then they stop, only for the problem to crop up again. If you compare that group of people or that class of people to the Nkrumah class, you realize that the Nkrumah class had precision. They had a certain direction that they wanted to go or to take the nation, as I have read to you here. And he was committed to it. And that is the second point I'm coming to, the willpower, the willingness to do it, irrespective of the consequence. Ogbehi, Nkrumah was daring enough to go to a UN General Assembly meeting and tell the West not to bring the Cold War to Africa and not to come and rape Africa of its resources. It tells you that he was a man who was bold and willing to do what he said he wanted to do. And that willingness and boldness, we've lost it. Our current leaders have lost it. They are scared. And I sometimes I understand why they are scared. Because you step on toes, and once you step on those toes, there are going to be consequences. But that is what leadership is. There's a saying, one photography, he was Nkrumah's personal photographer. Having had a discussion with him, he says that, look, Isaac, every great leader is hanged. Every great leader is hanged. Every great leader must die for something. And it's part of the sacrifice of leadership. And that is what the Nkrumahs had. They were willing to die for something. And today, we are benefiting for what they died for. And that is what our current leaders don't have. They don't have the boldness. They don't have the willingness. They don't have the conviction. It is dry leadership all over. And that is why we are seeing what we are seeing. So these are the two things I touch on: precision and confidence and willingness to work out that vision that you have. And this is what Nkrumah really had.
All right. Now, I have some more questions to ask you, but I want to respect our audience, those who are leaving a lot of comments. So I'm going to read some of them for you. So I will let you respond to some of them then before we move on, because we also respect their time. All right. I don't know if I will be able to read all of them, but let me just quickly go through. There is someone here by the name Krama Ture. Okay, so what is the said the okay, that Kwame is the Lion of Africa. Okay, that we agree. That is true. Okay, then another person said, Isaac, make a good point about approach. Does he, an individual and extensive researcher of Kwame, believe Kwame would have been a successful president with this approach? That is a question. Then another person, right? Africa Reemerged. That is the name of the person. Kwame, first of all, teaches us how to be African citizens, not citizens of colonial states. That the most important lesson and fight for his life till death. Stop the death. Stop the Nigeria and Ghanaian. Be Africa. Okay, I think the point is very clear. That first of all, we need to be Africans. Now another person wrote, no, it's the same person. When we learn to be African first, then we will start solving the problem of all Africans. We'll be responsible for the whole of Africa. So those are the comments that some of our viewers have left. Is there anything you want to say about that? Then I have some other questions to ask you.
All right. So I thank our viewers. There's a question about approach, if Nkrumah's approach would have still worked. The question is, what was Nkrumah's approach? Nkrumah's approach was basic, just Africa must unite. Now, how is Africa going to be united? Africa was going to be united by, first of all, realizing that we all, as African countries, have certain resources. So when you read Nkrumah's Africa Must Unite book, maybe I should recommend it to people that people should look out. Then you find Nkrumah's real approach to Africa Must Unite vision. Now, Nkrumah realized the fact that, and he was very knowledgeable of what each African country really has in terms of natural resources, in terms of capacity, right? So there are some African countries in the North Africa, the East Africa, they have certain resources, whether it's manganese, whether it is iron ore, whether it is oil, whether it is gold. And interestingly, you will find out that if you should do a survey of the various mineral resources or natural resources in the African country, they are related. You could find oil in Ghana, you could find oil in Nigeria, you could find oil in Angola, right? You could find manganese in Ghana. You could go to another country, you could find some manganese there. You could go to Congo, you could find diamonds there. You could go to another African country, you could find diamonds there. And Nkrumah was saying that, look, let us form a group where all African leaders of these various African states would now see how best we can team up our natural resources for the progress of Africa. Now, the first issue people thought was going to be a challenge was language. But the point is, Obehi, even in a small company, right, you could work with people who don't speak English. But at the end of the day, we end up communicating because there are several ways of communicating now. And even now, it would have been quite easier, let me say, in terms of solving the language problem for Nkrumah. Because there are interpreters of language, there are so many softwares that can interpret language, and we can also create the hub of trying to learn the language. And we could have still united in that front so that Nigeria would realize that, look, Ghana needs this, right? So if Ghana needs this for construction of its roads, I can supply Ghana with this raw material. But Ghana also has this product that Nigeria, we need to construct our housing. So if there's a housing deficit, but the raw material that we want from Nigeria, we want from Ghana, we can have it by having a bilateral agreement with Ghana. And because we are African countries, we subsidize the price that we should pay for it because we are exchanging our raw materials. So whilst Nigeria is getting a raw material from Ghana to build its housing, Ghana is getting a raw material from Nigeria to build its roads, whilst Angola is getting a raw material from Zimbabwe, right, to construct its dams. Zimbabwe is getting a raw material from Angola to also construct its schools. So there's a lot of activity in there that we could have united on. There are lots of things that Nkrumah felt that if Africans had envisioned and believed in this Africa Unite dream, right, having known the kind of resources each African state has, right, then we now decide to ask ourselves, how are we going to team up these resources for the betterment of Africa? And I bet you, if not for greed, I don't see how this should be difficult.
Okay, now I want to agree with you 100%. If it is possible, more than 100% are we. All right. Now, you see, I don't think it's really too difficult to be done, to be really honest. Apart from the fact that every other thing in life is difficult, no? There is no extra difficulty in forging ahead as a united Africa. Why do I say that? Because like you even say, no? In business, we do not all speak the same languages. Even today, there are businesses going on. Okay, now, there is one thing that we didn't make mention of, which if we want, we can also talk about, no? That the European power has already had Africa under control at the time. They were in charge. So having these young men now coming up to say they want to be free, of course, you're not going to have it at the platter of gold. Nobody's going to give you anything for free. Marcus Garvey has organized Africa to return home. A piece of land was even given Liberia. Some people have to come from US or the other way around to come and dabalu this to come and make sure that it didn't work. Many other efforts have been going on like this on the ground to make sure that the effort of the African United will not work. We know it is happening. It has been happening and it continues to happen. But I think what we really need to appreciate is that, like you have said, if we really have put in the effort, if we really have continued with the approach of Kwame Nkrumah, it is going to be difficult, but it would have been successful because it's the only thing that can really save us. Where we begin to look at how we can rely on our independence, on our effort, on our resources, because we do have a lot of resources that is able to take care of our needs. We don't need to become the bourgeoisie, rely on other people to be supplying our need. Look at, for example, just to give you a very boring example that still pays a lot of Nigeria today, you know, in the administration of IBB, General Ibrahim Babangida, when they wanted to go borrow money from IMF, which is what many African leaders continue to do, they borrow their money and they deflate their currency, they deflate their production. One of the conditions that the IMF gave Nigeria was that Nigerian economy was going to be opened up. Now, look at Nigerian economy that doesn't even have anything to offer. By opening up the economy, what does it mean? It means that we should open up for importation. If you open up for importation, you have nothing to exchange in terms of, now you just bring in and bring in. What do you have to give out? You only have oil, only crude oil. How can an economy survive on crude oil? Now, if that was a responsible government, you would say, okay, no, my people do not have something that we produce. Let us, first of all, lock it the way it is. Let us produce. We can export and then import. That is the only way economy can survive. Because there is no economy in the world. There is no any economy functioning in this world that rely only on the exportation of one crude or of one resources. The economy only functions by production because the people are then put to work. And this only happens when the people are free, when the leaders are intelligent, when they know what they are doing, when they are not living by just a crook and hook, when they have a vision, they know what they want, they care for the people. This is why we need people like Kwame Nkrumah and their ideology, people like Thomas Sankara, people who understand what it means to lead the people. Not to take order from what the kind of contract that we prepare in Rome or in Washington or to say that we are international. What does it mean international? What about the local people? Who cares about them? Okay, now the question I want to ask you for the Ghanaian people, and of course for all of us Africans, is that what do we mostly remember Kwame Nkrumah for? When we make mention of Kwame Nkrumah, what comes to our mind today?
I think people remember in Ghana, a lot of people remember Nkrumah for the struggle for independence, having led that struggle and having achieved that independence. And people get sad because they felt at a point, people still feel that Nkrumah's efforts have been in vain because what has become of the independence? It has been cheapened, it's been stamped down, it's been tattered because is the African really independent? That's the question, right? But we still cannot take the credit away from him that he achieved it with a collective effort of other people. I mean, not singly, but he led it, he inspired it, right? So people remember him for that, right? That Nkrumah was the one who sparked it, and also people remember him for great developmental projects in Ghana, because now when you come to Ghana, when it's about roads, it's about housing, it's about under drain construction and all that. People still think that, look, it is what Nkrumah built, the Akosombo Dam, the Tema Harbour, the motorway, the factories. That is what we are living on now. And some of them have been left to deteriorate, right? And yet people still feel that if not for Nkrumah, right, we wouldn't have had these things. So yes, people remember him for these things, these tangible things that we can talk about, things that we can point to. They are reference points. When you come to Ghana now, you talk about factories in Ghana. You are going to mention Nkrumah's factories, the tomato factory, the shoe factory, the glass factory, right? And because Nkrumah had a certain precision and vision, he knew what he was doing. So aside the factory, you can talk about the roads. The Temamoto Way was constructed way back in 1960 thereabout. It is still useful today. Even compared to some recent road, it is better than some roads that were constructed 2 years or 3 years ago. So how come that is possible? A road that was constructed in sometime in 1960 something is better than a road that was constructed just 10 years ago. So it beats your
Because we
imagination.
have thief. We have armed robbers that are just stealing the people.
Exactly, exactly. And Ogbehi, that's the point. That's what I'm saying. That if you have a leader who has the sense, the ability, the determination, and the vision, right? You may not get there immediately, but you would have made some progress. You would have made some progress, and that was what Nkrumah was doing.
Yeah, we will get there. We will get there. Like I always tell my Nigeria people, I believe in Nigeria, so I believe in Africa, so I believe in Ghana too. So I really want to appreciate the time that you have spent here explaining this important topic to us. I have learned a lot from it, and I believe also our viewer have learned a lot from it. I'm seeing the comment, and I'm seeing the view. Yeah, it is true that we have learned a lot from what you have taught us today. And of course, we are open to more conversation about our hero because we need to learn about them. It's very important that we continue to talk about them because they are the ones that have shaped the future that we enjoy today. So it is very important that we continue to talk and reflect about them because there are even some historians that have dedicated some of their time to study this. There are some of the things that you make mention of that they might not have thought of, because we cannot know everything. That is why we continue to reflect, we continue to talk, because so that by the time we talk, some of the things that I might not have even thought of, it can come to my imagination. Then I know more than I know before. So I really thank you so much, Isaac. Now, to conclude this podcast today, I want you to tell me what will be your final reflection? It kind of, maybe let's say this is the only part that the people see in this podcast, they will still get the message. It can be a kind of a personal message of yours. It can be anything at all. I don't know. Leave us with something for people to reflect upon. Is the last question. Please go.
All right. Thank you, Ogbehi, for this opportunity. Having worked on researching on the life of Nkrumah for a while now, I've come to have a certain thinking. And the thinking is that, first of all, let's ask ourselves, what do we want as Africans? What do we really want? Are we sure about what we want? Now, if we get to know what we want, then the next question is that how do we get what we want? And what are going to be the challenges? What are the things we need to compromise to get what we want? Right? These are the things that I begin to think about. And that is why it is important that we always try to appreciate what leadership is. Because it's going to be a vehicle of leadership that is going to get us to that point to achieving what we want, right? And that is why you can refer to Kwame Nkrumah, because he knew what he wanted and he knew how he needed to get what he wanted. Now he's dead and gone, right? Now we are living, it is our contemporary now, and I think that as young Africans especially, we need to begin to collaborate. And for me, after this podcast, if there's any young African out there, there's any young person, African, whether old or young, who is listening to this podcast, who would want to come on board for us to do this Nkrumah project in terms of financing, in terms of helping in whichever way, it is welcomed. Because I still believe that until Africa unites, and this is how we can chop the dream of unity into pieces and begin to work on it. Because it's like, Obey, you want to consume an elephant. It is so big and huge to consume at a go. So you need to chop the elephant into pieces and consume it little by little. And that is how the Africa Must Unite dream is. It is a very humongous dream. But then we need to begin to chop that dream into pieces. Let's take it one by one. In which forms can we unite? We can an African group or African group of Africans can unite to do a movie on Nkrumah. So you could have young Africans who are in Ghana teaming up with, say, young Africans who have shown interest in doing a movie on Nkrumah from maybe Botswana, Nigeria, or let's say in Burkina Faso. They should come together and we should get in touch and let us collaborate to do this for Africa. And that is what I want every person listening to this to take away, that look, it is not for your success alone. It is not for my success alone. It should be for the success of all of us. Because if we are able to achieve it for all of us, everybody will benefit. It is only when other people try to do it for themselves alone that other people don't benefit. But if we do it for all of us, everybody will benefit. And that is the theme of Nkrumah's Africa Must Unite. There has to be a deliberate, intentional effort of collaboration across board, collaborating to do films, collaborating to do projects in Africa, whether in the health sector, whether in the agricultural sector, whether in the housing sector, whether in the mining and gas sector, all over. And once we collaborate, we sign very fair, detailed contracts that everybody knows what he stands to get and what are the obligations are, right? We legalize these things and we stick to those contracts. We abide by the terms of the contract amongst ourselves as Africans. I think that we can go a long way.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Thank you really so much. I really appreciate the time and also your observation. It is true. It is true. It has been proven that the only solution that we really do have, available at least, is to unite. Because it is when we unite that we are going to be able to pull through. Because there is a war. There is a war that is going on, and we are in a war. If we haven't realized it, then that is unfortunate. We are in a war. And for us to survive this war, we need to unite. We need to unite abroad. We need to unite at home. Know that what we are against is monstrous, is big, is dangerous, is insidious. So if we don't open up to ourselves and be ready to help ourselves instead of stabbing ourselves in the back, like it has always been, we are going to go down very bad. So we need to unite for Africa, unite for ourselves. So thank you, all of us. Thank you, all of you that have accompanied us to the end of this podcast. It has been a pleasure on my part. I thank again Isaac for the time and the reflection that we have that he has shared with us here. I will come your way again to continue to support the good project that you believe in about Africa. Bye for now.